Fantasies are a completely healthy and normal part of the human experience, but because we rarely talk about them, it's really easy to wonder if your fantasies are normal or if you're normal, or if there's something wrong with you because you like this certain thing. So today we're going to explore some of the most common sexual fantasies based both on research and my experience as a sex therapist, as well as the benefits of fantasizing to help put your mind at ease and make you feel more comfortable and more able to enjoy the next time you dive into your fantasy world. Hey there, I'm Lauren Consul, a sex and relationship therapist, here to help you have more satisfying and secure sex and relationships. Before we get into the common fantasies, let's clear up the difference between desire, fantasies, and behavior, because I think this is where a lot of people can get caught up in wondering if they're normal or not. Now, desire refers to a strong wish or a longing for something, often accompanied by a sense of need or urgency. It's an internal drive that can motivate us, whether it's emotional or sexual. Fantasies are mental images or daydreams that allow you to explore what could happen. Here, the key difference is that fantasies are sometimes, but not always, linked to desires. In many cases, people have fantasies about things they don't ever actually want to do in real life, but really get a lot of pleasure out of fantasizing about. This is where, I think people get tripped up, particularly if their fantasy feels deviant, illegal, or involves harm to themselves or to others. But that's where understanding the line between fantasy and behavior comes in. Behavior refers to actual, observable action. Just because you fantasize about something doesn't mean you want to or will act upon it in real life, or that there's anything wrong with you. It can stay a fantasy, it can stay in your brain, you can really enjoy it and never actually want to do it. And just having that fantasy doesn't mean that you actually want to do that in real life just by having that fantasy. Here's an analogy that I like to use. Imagine you're really, really angry at somebody, because we have all been there. You might have the desire to get revenge or release some energy or emotions on this person and fantasize about punching this person in the face. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to act on that behavior. Fantasizing can actually be a really healthy way of releasing emotions without crossing into real world actions, because you're imagining it in your head. Now, this is the same with sexual fantasies. It may be something that you really enjoy, that you're really getting a lot of pleasure out of, that helps you orgasm, that helps you experience emotion, connection, whatever it is in that moment. But it's not something you actually want to do. And that is totally normal and okay. It can be a fantasy. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to act it out. Now, maybe you do want to act out your fantasies, and maybe they are deviant or illegal or do cause harm to others. That can still be okay, because you can get really close to that fantasy. You can role play, you can take elements of it. And as long as everyone involved is enthusiastically consenting, then that's great. Go for it, because there's so much in the world of sex and sexual exploration that you can get into, that you can push up on boundaries. And again, as long as everyone is enthusiastically consenting, that is great. Now let's dive into some of the most common fantasies that people have, again, to help put your mind at ease and to help hopefully let you enjoy these fantasies more when they come up, so you're not getting in your head worrying about them. The 6 most common sexual fantasies. The fantasies that I'm going to share are largely based on Dr. Justin Lehmiller's groundbreaking research in his book, Tell Me What You Want. I'll link that below if you want to dive more into this. In this book, he surveyed over 4,000 Americans about their sexual fantasies. Now, I'm also going to be sharing how I've seen these fantasies show up in my practice, working with partners and individuals, to really help you know even more that you are not alone and that this research actually aligns very much with what I see in my daily practice. The number one most common fantasy was group or multi-partner sex. Now, threesomes did top this list, but it also included foursomes and larger group encounters. Now, interestingly, the makeup of the group that people shared that they had in these fantasies did vary, often based on the gender of the person having the fantasy. Now, in Dr. Lehmiller's research, women often fantasized about a variety of gender combinations compared to men, which actually aligns with previous research that shows that women tend to express more sexual fluidity in general, so it's really no surprise that this shows up in their fantasies too. The second most common fantasy is power, control, and rough sex, or BDSM. And BDSM stands for bondage and discipline, dominance and submission, and sadism and masochism. sadomasochism. Now, this is a really broad term that covers everything from light spanking to full-on power play and really everything in between. Now, one particularly common fantasy under this umbrella that I hear all the time in my practice is forced sex or rape fantasies. And I actually want to go through some of these stats so you can see just how common the forced sex fantasy is, because so often I have people say, am I weird? Is this wrong? Is everything okay with me that I have this forced sex fantasy? And this can be both receiving the forced sex and putting forced sex on others. And Dr. Lehmiller's research looked at this. So in that research, he found that 61% of women had fantasized about being forced into sex, and 54% of men and 68% of non-binary participants had that same fantasy. Now, fantasies about forcing sex on someone else were also present, with 20% of women, 38% of men, and 38% of non-binary participants reporting this fantasy of forcing sex on someone else. This is often a fantasy that I find carries shame for people, but it's much more common than people realize, which is why I wanted to dive a little bit deeper into it, because many people have these fantasies, never want to actually act them out in real life. Now, for others, there may be interest in actually acting out this fantasy, which is possible because, again, you can have consensual forced sex, which is not the same as rape, where there is not consent. Remember, the key is that everyone participating in whatever you are doing is enthusiastic consent. If there's enthusiastic consent from everybody, then you can figure out ways to explore and engage in whatever fantasies that you're interested in. The third most common fantasy was novelty, adventure, and variety. Now, these fantasies are really about shaking up the routine. This is, again, a broad umbrella, but you can kind of think about it as being having sex in maybe unexpected places like public spaces, or engaging in acts that you've never done before, such as trying new positions, experimenting with food, maybe whipped cream or chocolate, or incorporating some sex toys. These fantasies really thrive on the idea of doing something different and exciting, whether that's through role-playing or exploring new technology, like creating erotic videos or anything else in between. So again, you can see this is a really broad umbrella of fantasy here. And it could even be similar to the fantasies that we were talking about above. A lot of these can overlap. They aren't necessarily these distinct categories that you only fall into one of them. The fourth most common fantasy was taboo scenarios. Now, these fantasies often involve breaking rules or playing with power dynamics. You can think of like teacher-student, boss-employee, voyeurism, or exhibitionism. People enjoy the thrill of doing something they shouldn't be doing, and these fantasies can, of course, overlap with other ones, especially like BDSM or other power play scenarios. For some, it can be about rebelling against societal messages or cultural norms, creating a sense of empowerment through taboo exploration. This is probably what I see most common, is kind of this pushback on cultural or familial norms or things that people are expecting of them. Or sometimes it can even be of like, I feel this way often in my real life, and I want to feel something totally different in my sexual experience, or something that I don't get to often do. The fifth most common fantasy, passion, romance, and intimacy. Now, contrary to the more adventurous fantasies, many people fantasize about deep emotional connections. These fantasies often involve romantic, caring, and emotionally fulfilling encounters where you feel desired, validated, and connected to somebody on a deeper level. It's not just about sex, it's about bonding. Now, when I see this come up in my practice, often people have a different type of shame. They're almost like, I don't have this wild fantasy or something that feels taboo, or like I shouldn't be doing it, or they have expectations like fantasies have to be this wild, crazy thing that involves things that they're not normally is. And it really normalizes that a lot of people have fantasies that are not based in kind of wild adventures, that they can be based on these deep emotional connections, and that is still a fantasy. Fantasies aren't just one way, and I hope that's becoming really clear in this list. The sixth most common fantasy is non-monogamy and partner sharing, and this is different than the first one, which is multi-partner or group sex. Often these fantasies involve more of relationships or sexual experiences with others that may include or not include your current partner if you have one. So this might include swinging, where you're swapping partners, or cuckolding, where you're watching your partner engage with somebody else, or it might be where you're having relationships with multiple people and those sexual experiences with multiple people that you are dating. Now, again, this doesn't always mean that people want to act these things out, but it's a really common theme of curiosity and exploration. And as you can see, this can overlap with some of the other fantasies because sometimes these non-monogamy or partner sharing fantasies may involve some BDSM elements. It may involve some group or multi-partner sex. It may involve some deep emotional intimacy and connection. So there isn't just these discrete boxes, but these are fantasy themes that really did come up a lot. There you have it, the 6 most common sexual fantasies based on research and what I see in my practice. Now the takeaway, you're not alone. Fantasies are natural, common, and nothing to feel ashamed about. It is a part of the normal human experience. Now, whether or not you want to act on them is up to you. But again, as long as everyone is enthusiastically consenting, there's no wrong way to explore your fantasies. Now, drop a comment below. I want to know what's one thing you learned today that surprised you about fantasies. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more content on building satisfying and secure sex and relationships.